Rivals of Aether 2 has had a lot of opportunities to play before the release date of October 23rd. The sequel of the unique 2015 platform fighter has had thousands of players try out the beta version during certain weekends throughout 2024, as well as a lot of pre-existing tournaments mainly focusing on Smash. While the specifics of the game have mixed reactions from the player base, it's undeniable that the meta is already advancing fairly quickly, and it's very possible that this could be a successful esport. Dan Fernacci and his company Aether Studios seem to be more trustworthy than Nintendo in terms of supporting grassroots events and listening to the competitive player base. Personally, I want to support Rivals 2 as much as possible, and will likely feature more content about the Rivals franchise in the future. Let's start off by discussing the players that have already sunk a lot of time into Rivals 2, along with some game analysis and predictions about the future of competitive Rivals. There have been hundreds of Rivals 2 beta tournaments across the world, with a lot of high-level competition, despite the players having limited access to the game. Large Smash tournaments like Genesis, Supernova, and Riptide had over 250 players into Rivals 2. Gommel and Combo Breaker had over 100, Wavelength had 99, Collision had 87, and there were dozens more stacked events both in person and online. Overall, I'd say Marlon seems to be the best player of the beta period, with Cake Assault at a close second, and ZB, Switch, Boyko, Lucius, Stango, Ion, Asashi, and MSB being not far behind. While this is not fully indicative of how the first season's ranking will turn out, it shows that their fundamentals and brief grinding has paid off, and that they could definitely compete at the top level in this game. The location of each event does sometimes make it difficult for travel, like Genesis being in Northern California will attract a largely different crowd compared to Supernova in Virginia. So it's very possible that some players that weren't able to attend as many larger events may be able to succeed at the top level if there's a nearby event or they get financial support. Additionally, it's rare to have a player be good at a platform fighter without previous platform fighter experience at the top level. Just look no further than this top 10. Marlon, Cake, ZB, Lucius, Asashi, and MSB are some of the best Rivals 1 players ever. But there's another game that has a surprisingly large amount of influence in Rivals 2. A certain project that is quite elusive. Okay, yeah, it's Project M. Yeah, we all know it's Project M. Everyone's been talking about it since Genesis. Switch, Boyko, Stango, and Ion being notable players of the Brawl mod. I don't think it's an accident that Rivals 1 and Project M both have transferable skills to Rivals 2. Movesets, stages, combo weights, recoveries, and overall game plans are fairly similar to Rivals 2's predecessor, and the addition of grabs, ledges, and shields allows for Smash players to have an easier time getting started, with PM players being known for fast-paced gameplay, tech skill, and a decent amount of experience for learning niche matchups. Now, I don't want to talk down about Ultimate and Melee players. Half the top 10 I mentioned dabble in other Smash games too, so clearly it's not that Rivals 1 and PM players just have better fundamentals. I think it speaks to the health of the Melee and Ultimate scenes, with hundreds of consistent tournament series across the world, while Rivals 1 doesn't have as much of a market share of the Smash player base, and Project M often has to host Shadow Majors to avoid Nintendo's wrath. Because Rivals and PM players have smaller scenes, I think it's more appealing for them to try Rivals 2 compared to Melee and Ultimate pros that are still very invested in their own games, and may fear that splitting focus could cause them to not be successful in both games. Now, there are still players from both Melee and Ultimate that are putting a lot of effort into Rivals 2. For Melee, Top 50 Peach BBats announced that he is planning on dropping Melee and focusing primarily on Rivals 2. Leffen got top 6 at the Genesis beta event, and others like Zane, Plup, Amsa, Mango, Joshman, Junebug, Morse Code, and more have expressed interest in playing the game more often. There was also a bracket at Eggdog Invitational that featured many of these players. For Ultimate, MKLeo has several deep runs at tournaments this year. Mr. R and Chag have won smaller events in Latin America and Europe, and others like Goblin and Grayson have given it a shot and may continue to enter. And there is still so much potential for players already familiar with Plat Fighters, maybe even some new faces entirely. It's encouraging to see players from so many different backgrounds giving Rivals 2 a chance. Now let's discuss the many regions of Rivals of Aether. Like I stated earlier, Rivals 2 beta events were a part of many pre-existing Smash majors, and this also happened for Rivals 1. California, Tri-State, MDVA, and the Midwest are probably the most notable locations for yearly Rivals tournaments at Smash events, while other locations like Arizona and Florida have decent attendance for standalone Rivals 1 events. And these areas, along with a few others, boasted consistent attendance from a core group of players that wanted to take their talents to offline tournaments. While it's clearly an issue for most players to travel to all of these locations consistently due to the size of the USA, one thing that Rivals 1 struggled with was international representation. In places like Latin America and Asia, it's usually Smash Ultimate or bust, with a little bit of Melee sprinkled in. Australia, Canada, and Europe have more notable Melee scenes, but Ultimate is still the majority of players' interest, and there's not that many players from these countries that travel for smaller plat fighters. I definitely don't want to talk down about the Rivals 1 organizers and players from these locations, as they all work hard despite the challenges, and the Rivals LATAM Twitter account is fire. But an international scene is difficult for many platform fighters, as the newest Smash title gets the vast majority of the player base, with Melee in second and the rest being much lower. I think Rivals 2 has a lot of potential to be an international esport. Dev support and a decent sized player base may attract countries outside of the USA to grind the game and compete on a global scale. America will still likely be where the most players are, but we may see some overseas talent travel across the world and take our best players to the brink. Now let's talk characters. With the Rivals of Aether franchise being one of the few plat fighters to primarily have original characters, the mainstream success and casual appeal is unclear. Characters like Crag, Forceburn, Orcane, and Raster have started to become recognizable and iconic to the genre, but it's clear that they are still fighting from behind compared to Nintendo and TV characters. Additionally, the roster is pretty small, meaning that while balance is more manageable and learning matchups aren't as tedious for players, it's increasingly possible that players may not find a character that fits them. DLC characters for Rivals 2 have been announced and will likely end up doubling the roster count. I'm just a little concerned that some players may not be as invested. I do think that there's a lot of potential though, with increased effort being put into the Aether lore through character trailers, side games like Dungeons of Aether and Lovers of Aether, and in-game exposition. Personality and detailed characteristics are appealing to a surprising amount of people. Just look at Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl's situation with not having voice acting. And that's also another thing that Rivals 2 has incorporated. Personally, I think sound design isn't that important to games I play, but others are pretty passionate about it. In terms of the specific characters, they are marketed as them being from one of 4 natural elements. But in reality, archetypes and movesets matter more to a dedicated player base. Most characters are returning from Rivals 1, such as Zetterburn, Maple, Raster, Orcane, Clarin, Crag, Forceburn, and Rano, while newcomers Fleet and Loxodon have joined the roster, and workshop character Lorena was announced a couple months ago. Most returning characters have the same moveset and special trait, like Zetterburn's Fireball, Maple's Seed, Raster's Slipstream and Aerial Strong attacks, Orcane's Puddle, Clarin's Stun, Crag's Rock moves, Forceburn's Smoke, and Rano's Bubble. I think these were all great ideas implemented in Rivals 1, and they're used in Rivals 2 pretty well. It's pretty easy to tell someone about these mechanics. Most of these you can explain the general concept of in a few seconds, and specific interactions can be explained after trying the game for a bit. Some of these special traits don't have as much significance due to ledges and grabs, but they're still notable and fun. For general movesets, I think having a lot of the moves being similar to Smash moves is a two-edged sword. Like, it's good to have familiarity. Raster's Nair being like Captain Falcon's is cool because I play Falcon a lot in Smash and I'm used to using the move in neutral. But saying that Raster is just Captain Falcon in bird form is not accurate, or something that Rivals probably even wants. Zetterburn is said to be similar to Wolf in Project M, but as a Wolf main in that game, they're not that similar. Having most of the same moves doesn't mean the game plan is the same. There can be a lot of different strategies and kill confirms that are very different across the titles. People said that Absa was Zelda Aerials with Pikachu Recovery, which wasn't that inaccurate, but that's overlooking a lot of the details of how the character plays. Smash has utilized a lot of different types of characters, from heavies, to swordies, to rushdown, to projectile based, and I don't think it's bad that Rivals of Aether also utilizes those archetypes. Smash didn't patent a back air that's a diagonal leg kick. And again, familiarity can help introduce players to pick up the game and find stuff that works. I just think that it's important to also have depth and uniqueness, or else the game is just a smaller, worse version of the game they already play. Every platform fighter will always be compared to Smash. They're the original and the biggest, so you can't avoid it. I do think Rivals of Aether has done a great job with balancing familiarity and creativity. I'm curious to see if the larger platform fighter player base will agree. And hey, there's always the chance for another workshop mode for people to add their own characters and have another incentive to buy the game. Accessibility. I already mentioned this a little bit with like recognizing different moves and stuff, but I think it's also worth considering how likely any person from any background can start playing and be interested in competitive play. To start, the cost of Rivals of Aether 2 is $30, which I think may turn some people away because there's a lot of free-to-play games out there. However, those are often in different genres like MOBAs or FPS. Most fighting games are sold at a similar price, if not double. Multiverses being one of the few to be free to play, but has a lot of potential transactions to unlock characters, giving someone the option to play the game for free but only giving them like 3 characters to play is not a viable solution. $30 with free DLC seems to be an adequate price to get profit, while not forcing the buyer to spend a small fortune on the game multiple times. Free to play will definitely boost the player base considerably, but Aether Studios realized this and gave a free week of play to everyone, which many of you are probably doing right now. Inevitably, there won't be as many players once the free week ends, but I think it's a good idea to give people a trial run at the game and convince them to buy it on October 23rd. Another part of accessibility is what the game is released on, which is currently just PC. Rivals 1 was mainly PC as well, eventually getting on the eShop for Xbox and Nintendo Switch, but the Xbox version didn't have much popularity and the Switch port had input delay, along with no crossplay between consoles and PC. For the common competitive gamer, having a good PC is pretty necessary, so for some it won't be that big of a deal, but for those that don't have as much disposable income or stick to console gaming, it may not be as favorable, especially since it seems like Rivals 2 requires a higher quality PC to run compared to Rivals 1. Also, for tournaments, having a lot of PCs is difficult to manage as a TO. NASB 1 had some success due to the ability to run the game on Switch, which TOs already had in stock, while Multiverses had fewer offline events due to the lack of a console version. I'm sure the goal is to get Rivals 2 on the Switch ASAP, and hopefully for tournament viability the input lag will be very low if not zero. But for now, PC only may be the option, and I'm not sure how accessible that really is. And lastly is game difficulty. Fighting games are notorious for being unforgiving, Rivals 1 being no exception. Before Workshop release, players were consistently met with a small, insanely good player base, rarely allowing for lower level players to get much practice closer to their skill range. I still think that there's going to be a lot of players that feel overwhelmed with how good some players are, but at some point players just need to be realistic and either practice more or lower their expectations. Plus, it seems like the ranked mode the Rivals team is going to implement may allow for players to get more accurate matchmaking. I think the gameplay changes like shields, grabbing, and ledges were specifically made to be more accessible to Smash players. And they definitely succeeded in that. And there's not as much technically demanding inputs while still seeming to have a high skill ceiling for the game. So I think it's at a good balance. Plus, they've been very clear about receiving feedback and considering different changes to improve the game. I'd say Rivals 2 is fairly accessible overall. There could always be slight changes to further prioritize accessibility, but it's definitely going in the right direction. Mechanics and old game versus new game. Like I said earlier, some changes implemented in Rivals 2 are not very popular. Parries having less viability, some characters not having great options versus shield, and offstage recoveries being more linear have been a side effect of adding more Smash-like mechanics, while other niche decisions like removing Drift DI have caused the game to be, in some people's opinion, not truly Rivals of Aether anymore. I think a lot of people are reminded of the huge difference between Melee and Brawl, and I can see a resemblance, but I don't think it's quite the same. Brawl had a lot of intentional gameplay changes to lower the skill ceiling, which ironically still made a surprisingly technical game. But game balance was even worse than Melee was, and there was no patches to fix it. With frequent patches and a company that embraces competitive play, I think that Rivals 2 won't be nearly as divisive as Brawl was. Does that really matter though? The old game versus new game debate is very common regardless of specific circumstances. Fighting game players frequently have to deal with a new version of the game they already enjoy, and many new iterations have unpopular changes, and the players felt forced to change to the new game despite them liking the old game more. Melee is one of the few old games to still have a large player base, while many are reserved for being a small side event at majors like Supernova or Combo Breaker. I'll be honest, the idea that this would happen to Rivals 1 kinda makes me sad. I really enjoy the game. I've entered probably 100 local tournaments for it over the years, and I think it's a fun, polished, balanced game that Aether Studios should definitely be proud of. And like some other players, I agree that Rivals 2 is a bit rough around the edges, but that's compared to a pixel art game that's been regularly updated for a decade. Have you seen how Rivals 1 looked early in its lifespan? Not exactly the prettiest sight. So I think that Rivals 2 is a good product for people to invest in and has a lot of potential. But I also think there's a lot of potential for Rivals 1 to maintain an active player base too. In Maryland and Virginia, we have no intentions of stopping the Rivals 1 hype just because we're going to run Rivals 2. We're even hosting a Rivals 1 Invitational in early November, so be on the lookout. Anyway, I'm a bit nervous about the future of the Rivals of Aether franchise, but I think both Rivals 1 and Rivals 2 can coexist and even thrive. I'm excited for the Rivals franchise to get a lot of eyes this year, and I'm looking forward to watching some stacked tournaments with some of the best platform fighter players duking it out in Rivals of Aether 2. It's gonna be a blast, sit back and enjoy. Thanks for watching. I plan on making a few Rivals of Aether videos in the near future. If there's something specific you'd like to see, then let me know in the comments or join our Discord here. Help us reach our goal of 1,000 subscribers by February 2025 to announce a special project that has been in the works. Peace out and buff Raster.